Greetings and welcome to the Saco School Board meeting for Wednesday, July 20th, 2022. Call the meeting to order. It's 5 p.m. I'd like to invite you all to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you very much. Item 3 on the agenda this evening is approval of school board meeting minutes dated June 16, 2022. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Mr. Mayor,
School Board Member Truman.
I move we approve the school board meeting minutes dated June 16th, 22.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by School Board Member LaFortune. Any discussion on the minutes? Roll call
No
vote.
discussion, but I think it was actually Jeff that came in before me.
My apologies. Roll call vote on the minutes. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Richard?
Yes.
School Board Member LaFortune?
Yes.
School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0 to approve the minutes. That brings us to item 4, adjustments to the agenda. Any adjustments this evening? Seeing no adjustments, moving on to item 5. There seems to be no correspondence in the packet. That brings us to item 6, public session. If there's anybody who would like to address the school board, please come forward and be heard. Please state your name and address for the record and keep your comments to 3 minutes. Seeing nobody seeking recognition, moving on to item 7, superintendent's report. Superintendent Ray.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Good to see you all again. It's been a few weeks as we get a chance to enjoy a little bit of the summer out there. Several updates, and some of the stuff that I normally would update you on is in the packet tonight, so I'm not going to talk about things twice. As we end this year's budget cycle, Jason has closed out, starting to close out the books. There's a memo in the packet of what we anticipate for year-end expenditures and what that will look like, while at the same time, very proud of this board and the group of people that we worked with last year, because not only did we take care of several financial items, we've got Mike working real hard on making sure that we've had some big additions to our schools updates, and Mike's going to get a chance to talk about some of the school construction stuff at the end of this. Last week I had a great opportunity to be in Washington, D.C., and to meet with our state elected officials. It's just really cool being able to go to your senator's office in a building and see the plaques on the wall of who they're by. But we get to talk about several key items in a face-to-face, and one of those is about federal special education funding. Back in the 70s, the federal government passed IDEA that is to be funded at 40%, and currently that funding level hovers around 15%, and in the next budget cycle, if things stayed the same because of the changing and costs and whatnot, that would actually go down to 13%. So we had very supportive from King and Collins' office to understand that if federally IDA was funded at the level that the law talks about, that would mean another $1.8 million that would come to the city of Saco. So really discussing with them is like, you understand that 40% isn't going to happen in 1 year, but how do you develop a plan to ramp up to that level over X number of times? So that's a big piece. Also, while it's not necessarily as big of a challenge in this part of the state, talking about access to broadband and how many schools in the states, when they went remote, couldn't really go remote because they didn't have broadband in those communities. And so that was great topics. And then, more importantly, talking about and giving thanks to the bipartisan bill on school safety that just got passed. There's $13 billion nationwide, and we'll start to see some of that roll out. And that's done in 2 ways. One is about making sure that facilities are safe, but number 2, investing in mental health services and some sustainability and training for those services. So while we've gotten no information, those will be future conversations that we'll have. Summer schools and rec are off and running and doing really well. I know this will be probably one of our more challenging weather weeks for those. but it's great to see the kids in the building and all the activities going on, which, on the other hand, is not necessarily what Mike loves to see, all the activity going on, because it does make us very nervous every year about how we start the school year and have rooms ready and hallways ready for teachers to get back in the building. And days like this are not necessarily the best days for doing floors when the heat's at this level. Just a reminder to any of the parents out there that have not registered your kiddo for kindergarten, it's really important for us to have those numbers. And as we see an increased population growth that's going to occur here in Saco, it's even more important for us because it's going to be essential that we look at our classroom sizes on both sides of the city and make sure that we have room to be able to move kiddos around a little bit as we begin to see and have families move into the Comfort Inn. We have a lot of planning and adjustment that will need to be made because that's not going to be a easy situation where we know numbers at any point in time, and I'll talk about more of that when we discuss that situation. Jeannie and Mike are working on the new bus transportation program as they're starting to get that piece to come forward. The hardware's in, they're starting to install that, and then they're working on the initial upload of what the transfer of students to go into that system would look like, and then that's when all the fine tuning will come. So be interesting to see what kind of details we'll get so that hopefully early this fall we're able to roll out more of the interactive piece for parents. That will certainly be a slow roll and not something that happens on day one. But as we get into the fall, being able to look at your phone and see where your bus route is at will be helpful to parents throughout the year. I'd like to ask Mike to come up at this time and just talk a little bit about the young school building and how that's going and a couple of the other summer projects that we've had going on. Mike?
Second to set up here. All right. Good evening, everyone. It's been a super busy summer so far, and everything's going well. We had the state police testing or inspecting our buses today and stuff, and everything went extremely well. There's a couple of issues we got to deal with, but nothing that's going to interfere with our operations. I've got a ton of projects going on this summer, so like the superintendent said, I'll just go over a couple of them, and then I'll answer any questions about any other projects that are going on in any of the schools, and just kind of let you know what's going on. This is a 4,500 square foot building, our auxiliary building at Young School. You can see it's got 4 classrooms, 5 bathrooms, a couple of office spaces. Right now, they're a little bit behind schedule. There's still a few more things that'll happen that maybe we can catch up a little bit of time. But it looks like it's going to be kind of finishing up about the same time school ready to start. So we'll be working with them to make sure we get everybody kind of in there as soon as we can, and hopefully we'll start right on time. And it looks like we shouldn't have any problem with that. If you're going by the building right now, it's kind of interesting because they're putting some water control material around the building. That stuff is about the same color as the building's going to be. So if you're looking at the building from Route 112, that's pretty much what the building's going to look like. Roof's on, windows are in, doors are on order. They haven't shown up yet. They're starting to do the sprinkler system and the ducting work inside, so there's nothing right now that's holding anything up. Everything's going around just like it should be. So if anybody has questions on that building, I'll let you know the next project is coming up. Okay. I mean, Great Falls has been wonderful to work for so far, and we just have a good relationship now. Also, we've just about 99% complete with re-roofing 2 sections of the middle school. We broke it down into 5 sections, the middle school that are 30 years old that needed to get re-roofed. So we've done 2 now, and like I said, most of the materials now they've been finishing up and getting rid of all the extra stuff that was on the roof. So we'll be done with that within the next week or so. And then I've asked them to give us a quote for the 3 sections remaining that we still need to do that are older.
And Mike, when we discussed that quote for the section of the roof, we believe that with the money in the next budget and a little bit in the following budget, we could have that roof totally replaced, correct?
We could. I mean, it's going to be about the same. I think this one was 300, a little over, between $300,000 and $400,000 for these two sections. So for a little bit, probably about $500,000, we'd finish up the roof. I mean, that would, working with this company, they were so quick and so, just they jumped on this and got it all done this early in the summer season. It'd be nice to do that next summer and get the whole thing completed, so we wouldn't have to worry about it.
And then when we talk about painting that will occur at the middle school, that will happen in off hours during weekends and holidays. There was the company that quoted us, offered us a significant price break by not doing it during their peak summer hours. And it was significant enough to say, yeah, we should take that because we'll just be able to get more done in that. It will just, we like to have the front entrance done at the start of the school year and those pieces. But some of the other projects will take care of vacation weeks, just pushing it for this summer and to be able to, I think we saved like $20,000 that we'd be able to invest into other parts of the building. That just seemed like a good decision to wait, towards those weeks where they can bring a crew in and it's not their busy time of year. So no sense to pay the premium.
Also want to say thank you for supporting the second maintenance person. I got him working now. He's been working for a couple of weeks. We got him up to middle school, just working in all the classrooms, he's kind of learning his way around. We'll probably be looking at setting him up with right now, everybody that works for maintenance, and we kind of use our own tools and stuff, and so hopefully we'll set him up so we can go ahead and start having our own stuff for the school, belongs to the school and stuff, and we can set him up with a vehicle so we can get back and forth and around. So I just kind of guess expect that request, I guess, in the near future. But thank you very much. I appreciate it. Mr. Joel Dalgo, he's doing a great job, and he's fitting in pretty well.
Any questions for Mr. Garrity? Seeing no questions, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Superintendent Ray, do you have anything further in your superintendent's report?
I'm finished. Any questions?
Any questions for the superintendent? No questions. Moving on to items 8, Chair's report. Chair LaFortune.
Thank you. Yes, I do have a couple of things to report out on. So earlier this week, Jeremy, myself, the mayor, and the city administrator sat down to talk about some items that Jeremy sort of alluded to will be coming up later in this evening's agenda around the budget implications of the influx of refugees, and also as it relates to the building that was just discussed. We asked to see if we could get onto the council agenda a waiving of any of the permitting fees that go with the building, since it's a city building, and that is something that should be moving forward onto an upcoming council agenda. So those two things were covered in a meeting we had on Monday morning. And then the other item, if you had not seen it, was that there was a council meeting this past week, and just to make note of the potential for a number of charter amendments that are coming around that may be returning for a first reading related to school board and the election cycle impacting all of us. So if you haven't seen that, go back and look at the agenda from the previous week for council, and that has the details related to that. But I just wanted to relay that that had been something that had come up recently.
Thank you. Any questions for the chair? Moving on to item 9, staff reports. There seem to be no staff reports in the packet this evening. That brings us to item 10, board subcommittee meeting minutes. For the strategic committee, the next meeting is to be determined. For the finance committee, the next meeting is to be determined. Infrastructure committee, there's no meeting scheduled at this time. And the personnel committee, there's no meeting scheduled at this time. That completes the board subcommittee meeting minutes. That brings us to item 11, old business. There's no old business. And so that brings us to item 12, new business. We have several items beginning with item A, which is new hires. Board, in your packet, there is a memorandum for new hires. Superintendent Ray, does that require a vote? It does require a vote, so is there a school board member Truman?
I'm going to apologize in advance in case I butcher anybody's last names. I move we approve the nomination of Aaron DiDonato, Saco Middle School composite teacher, Michael Carestia, Saco Middle School alternative education, special education teacher, Stuart Platt, Saco Middle School alternative education, regular education teacher, Margaret Rigney, C.K. Burns third grade teacher, Catherine Doyle, Saco Middle School science teacher, Kenneth Lamb, Saco Middle School humanities teacher, Suzanne Rondo, Saco Middle School RTI math teacher, and Rebecca Sadowski Beto, C.K. Burns school counselor, and issue a contract for the 2022-2023 school year.
Second.
Motion's been made by School Board Member Truman, second by School Board Member Johnston. Any discussion? And for the record, there's no relation to Catherine Doyle with me. Any discussion on this item? Seeing no discussion, roll call vote. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Richard?
Yes.
School Board Member LaFortune?
Yes.
School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman?
Yes.
School Board Member Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. It looks like there's some transfers requiring no action in your memo, and then there's also appointments requiring no action. Any questions regarding this memo from the board?
There is also a number of resignations that do require motions.
I think we're on item A. We haven't got to item B yet.
Item A was the new hires. Oh, okay.
We haven't got to item B yet.
I thought you jumped ahead as well.
If there's no questions on the new hire memorandum, we will move on to item B, which is resignations. There was a memo in your packet on resignations, several requiring affirmation by the board. Is it School Board Member Johnston?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move we accept the resignation of Rebecca Anderson, Saco Middle School special education teacher, Alessa Fowley, Fairfield School special education teacher, Abby Alden, human resources manager, and Danielle Bogardus, Fairfield teacher.
Motion's been made by School Board Member Johnston. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by School Board Member Truman. Any discussion on accepting the resignations of these four teachers?
I just want to add that thank you to all of them for working here in Saco, and wish them the best.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Roll call vote on accepting the resignation. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Richard?
Yes.
School Board Member LaFortune?
Yes.
School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman?
Yes.
School Board Member Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. There are also some resignations in there that does not require board action. Any questions on the memorandum of no action? Okay. Moving on to item C, the ESEA public comment.
Good evening. Every year we receive federal funds through title grants, and those funds change year to year. So we have our final allocations and are preparing our grant application for the state of Maine. Just a high-level overview, we do have increases in all of the titles, and what I will do is just briefly go through each of those titles and summarize our planned spending for those. Title I is designed for supplemental instruction, and Fairfield is the only Title I school-wide program for Saco schools. We spend those funds in 3 different areas: supplemental instruction for literacy for students who are struggling to meet benchmarks, supplemental instruction in mathematics for students who are identified as needing that instruction, and then the third project that's required is spending for homeless students. Our spending on supplemental instruction is primarily salaries and benefits for staff that provide those services to students. And then we also allocate funds for homeless students, and those are generally spent in transportation. With McKinney-Vento, we have to look at best interest placement for students, which means that both the sending district for a homeless student and the receiving district for a homeless student have to determine where a student's educational needs are best met. And then transportation services are split between both districts. So if we have a student that was attending school in Falmouth and is now considered homeless and residing either with a family member or unfit housing in the city of Saco, and they wanted to stay in Falmouth, we would be responsible for 50% of those costs. So the title funds, some of those are allocated for transportation in that area and other items that can help ensure that students experiencing homelessness can have access to their education. So if there's money needed for school supplies, poster board, that sort of thing, we try to ensure that they're able to access their education equally to students who have those resources available. Title II allocations are around teacher quality and/or professional development. We have utilized that as a class size reduction at CK Burns and use that towards salary and benefits to ensure that we have lower class sizes there. Title III funds are allocations for instruction for English learners and immigrant students. We have had quite a fluctuation of those funds because they look at differences year over year in identified students. So we either have it or we don't. And we have also had access, which they don't allocate until September or October. If there's a dramatic increase in an immigrant population, that's an additional allocation. So we will certainly be looking to have those funds. In the last school year, those funds equaled just over $7,000. And so while we do anticipate that again, we certainly can't count on that until we actually see it. We will be looking to support a program called Elevation, which will help to provide ILAPs, which are individualized language acquisition plans for students, and better manage those across schools, as well as connected resources that are part of that program. And we also are looking to coordinate with community-based organizations so that we can have some immigrant-specific services that will be funded through that. And lastly is Title IV funds, which we have in the past and will continue to transfer to Title II, which will support that classroom reduction. There are also private school allocations. So if you look at the attached memo, you can kind of see the different allocations. We work in Saco with Thornton, Sweetser, and Margaret Murphy to help them as the fiscal agent and determine where they will spend those funds, and then we write the checks out through those title funds to ensure that they get access to certain titles. So that does reduce the overall Saco Public School Department allocation from the original allocation to the city of Saco. There is an attachment on that, a form link on that attachment as well, if anybody would like to submit any comments or feedback as to how those title funds are allocated, and we will certainly take that into consideration as we develop the grant. Questions?
School Board Member Gale.
Just a couple of questions. Just in the past, do we get much public comment or questions about the allocation?
I don't necessarily have this historical knowledge here. Generally speaking, there is a grant application team that also consults with community members and classroom teachers, and that's where the bulk of that comment comes from. I would not imagine that there would be a bulk of community input from this, but we certainly welcome that.
Sure. And then in terms of the funding, it looks like I can understand, and thank you for how you've laid it out. I think it's really easy for me and the public to grasp on some of these, like the Title III funds. I can certainly understand why there's fluctuations in those allocations, but just at like a high level, what makes these funds fluctuate between the fiscal years? It's driven off of data, like student data, I imagine, right?
So there are a couple of different fluctuations. There's what the federal government decides to allocate to the state of Maine, and then there's also how Maine decides to allocate what the state of Maine has received from the federal government to individual schools. And that, yes, is based on a variety of metrics from enrollment to a really important one that we urge all families to take advantage of is that free and reduced lunch, which has been a particular challenge for us in the last couple of years. While we're grateful to have free lunch available to all students, that certainly decreases the incentive to complete that free and reduced lunch application, which in turn drastically impacts our Title I funding in particular.
School Board Member LaFortune?
The only thing that I was going to add was probably more of a comment around the question that Will had asked about feedback, and that I know in years past, and it came up last year, we've had times where we've been presented the numbers and, you know, we've had a meeting agenda item around it, and then other years where we haven't really talked much about it. I really like this format, and I'm, you know, probably more so not just the format, but all of the details around how it's used, because it's, I mean, just from the standpoint of not just the general public, but it's really educational for the school board to really know how these funds get used and the things that we use them on. And just a comment that I'm happy to see this back on the calendar again of something that we cover.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions?
And,
School Board Member Gale.
and not to belabor, but I echo that. I mean, since this is the first time I've seen this is laid out really well, and I didn't mean to grill you with like this, but it's very informative, and thank you for putting it together.
Okay. If there's no questions, we'll move on to the next item. Thank you very much. That brings us to item D, an equity assessment in your packet. There's a memorandum from Superintendent Ray on the 2021-2022 equity assessment. Superintendent Ray, will you be presenting, or will?
So just as an overview for this piece, as we know, we will have a very changing community this fall. And part of our work is to always review historically the data and the trends that happen in our school department. And we felt that it was very important, knowing that we would be in anticipation for such a change, to really make sure that we took a snapshot of where we were prior to this. And I know that in some of the data, the COVID year really throws things off. But as we move forward and we look at the work that we need to do with equity and inclusion and making sure that all children are treated equitably and equally throughout things, this is just kind of a high-level overview that will inform some of the decisions that we make throughout the school year. And so, Meg, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. To piggyback on that high-level overview, one of the ways in which we try to understand if we are equitably applying different practices across demographics is to look at the percent of the population that is white and the percent that is non-white, and then look at a variety of factors to determine if the percentage of the general population matches the percentage of the application of different metrics to those populations. We are also hopeful to be able to expand this in the future to look at the ELL population as another demographic of this, look at socioeconomic status as another demographic of this, and do some of the similar comparisons that you'll see here. So those baseline demographics have us just hovering around 10% for non-white students, and that's kind of the metric that we will be comparing to as we look at the other items. So we have first IEPs and 504 plans, and again, there's some variation year to year, and we do see that currently there our students of color are slightly less likely than their white peers to have an IEP or 504, and the literature is a bit mixed as to whether that is, good or bad, if there's an under-identification or not. So we will continue to keep an eye on that, but we are glad to see that there is a pretty close match in terms of those percentages. When we look at discipline data, again, this is a year where our 2020-21 data is a big anomaly in terms of the overall numbers, because looking at in-school and out-of-school suspensions during a hybrid and remote year looks very, very different. So I would, use caution when looking at that 2021 data. We see that Saco's data has a far better picture than the national data with respect to application of disciplinary procedures, but we certainly want to continue to look at that very closely, and had a slightly higher percentage for in-school suspensions of our non-white students and a slightly lower percentage of out-of-school suspensions. So those are just some areas that we see. We had a late addition. The access to data for Thornton Academy is a bit tricky as compared to publicly available data, the state reporting system, and the way that the state reporting system utilizes multiple sending schools or multiple Maine residents, not just Saco residents. So we apologize for the late add on that graduation data, but we're able to get that today. And we see that the graduation rates for white students and non-white students are very close, which again is promising data, and we will continue to look at that. A couple other areas that we look at as we're assessing our own equity policies and procedures are professional development. So some high-level overviews of things that we are continuing to work on. Our policy manual audit allows us to kind of have a new lens and ensure that policies are in line. We have a social studies curriculum to ensure that we're looking at instruction equitably across the pre-K through 8 spectrum. We've worked with Inclusion Maine. We have talked about a larger catchment area for hiring and recruiting. We were able to go to the Boston area this spring to look outside of just southern Maine to try to diversify our pool of candidates. And we have also had our administrative team work with Heart of Biddeford and their DEI work on some webinars that we've been able to participate in. And lastly, we participated as a full staff in a welcoming newcomers professional development that was provided by the Maine DOE. That pretty much covers where we are now, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
Any questions for Assistant Superintendent Parkhurst? School Board Member Gale.
In terms of the rest of the state, 10% non-white, where do we rank within the rest of the state in terms of that population?
I don't have that specific data, but I can get back to you with that percentage.
Any further questions? Seeing no further questions, thank you very much. Moving on to item E, the building project update. E1 was a site selection memo that is in your packet. Superintendent
Okay.
Ray, do you want to go over this?
Thank you. So as part of the process here tonight, we have to start planning for what would be a straw poll in the fall. So as part of the process, the straw poll is in a meeting where an informal poll will be taking about which site is preferred as we move forward. Now, there is a lot of work that has to happen to get to the straw poll piece. We've had 3 community meetings. At the last community meeting, it says in there what the recorded vote was of 30 people in favor of the Sweetser property, 2-1 in favor of, I believe it was the middle school property. And so that gave us an indication on how to move forward. And so what I first would like to do here before we, talk about this memo a little bit more is I'd like to ask Norm and representatives from Oak Point to come forward to just rehash for the public all of the sites that have been talked about and some of the reasons and thought processes that went into this. We've been talking about possible sites as a committee since August of last year. And we're getting into the point where we really have to start moving forward, because also when we talk about funding and timeline, there are some interesting things that we will have to deal with over the next year to make sure that we are ready to vote in June of next year. And so if we could get Oak Point to come up and talk a little bit and move to the slides that they have available for us.
Sure. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Norm Lemire from Oak Point Associates. I'll start with the timeline based on where we stand right now and moving forward, as Jeremy said, towards a referendum. And I'll let Jonah DeWaters, our civil engineer, give you some details on the site selection. So based on the fact that we've identified the preferred site, we have tasks that we need to get through this summer, and you can see listed as June through August of this summer. We're working on site selection items. We're currently looking at traffic scoping, and we've done traffic counts at intersections around the site. We're having wetland delineations done on the site. We've just contracted to have an environmental site assessment. We'll be moving forward with some geotechnical information. Once we know exactly what we're looking at for the portion of the site that we need for the building, we'll be looking at property appraisals, and then any other state agencies we need to deal with as part of the process. Meanwhile, kind of concurrently with the site selection piece, we've visited some of other school facilities to get an idea of what other buildings are out there and how things are laid out for grade configurations that we're looking at. We're developing the educational specifications. Actually, your administration is working on that. And we're figuring out the space allocation for the school buildings based on DOE guidelines. And we'll be working further with them to understand how big these buildings are and what you have for rooms within them. So moving on, as we get that information on the site, we'll be doing more conceptual looks at the site layout. Jeremy mentioned we'll have a straw poll. So once we know all the information on the site and are ready to move forward with state approval, we'll be meeting with the public, presenting all that information to you, and conducting an informal vote, show of hands, to show that the state that the city of Saco supports this site that we've chosen. And that allows us to present this to the committee, construction committee from the State Board of Education, and then finally in front of the whole board for site approval. Again, concurrently with that process, we'll be starting on the design of the building, a conceptual design, and laying that out, and also creating the budget that will be presented at the referendum. We expect that to happen. We'll probably have an October approval for that piece. And then moving forward to the concept approval for the state board, we'll be looking towards a January approval for that. Again, a similar process for the public. We'll have a public presentation of what we're looking at for the building, and a straw poll to show the state that the city of Saco approves of the direction we're heading in. And that will allow us to proceed with a referendum vote in June of next year. And then just a little bit of information on the buildings that we're looking at.
Norm, can I just interrupt you for 1 second? One of the things, and this is something that between Bill and Norm, could you talk a little bit about, as we were developing the timeline, we've put a timeline in there that lists all of these key dates. We had some unique features in Saco about how something gets on the process and the number of meetings that Saco had to have to get something on the ballot that pushes us into there's a rule that has 6 months from concept approval to a public vote.
I think it was a little less than that, but yeah, it's quite a process, and I think Bill would be the one to be able to walk you through each of those steps a little more clearly. There's certain number of days between each step in the process that's required.
So through that piece, and we can talk about that more, it's important for us to understand that because of the requirements for the postings and the number of days, and it's laid out in that timeline of what needs to be done, it appears that we are going to get one bite at the apple for voting. Meaning that I believe the law says 6 months from concept approval by the State Board of Education, you have to have a positive vote. If you do not have a positive vote, according to the law, you're done. You're off the list. Money goes away. So it's important that over the next few months, we, as a community, get on the same page on what happens here in this situation and get support behind it, because we're going to have one chance. And based off the numbers here, that's almost like a good Powerball ticket that the community's hitting, as far as what would be paid for a school. So that's a very important piece when we talk about funding and the options that come here tonight. Sorry to interrupt,
No, that's
but
right. That's very
it's
good.
a very important part for us to understand.
So the program committee looked at different grade configurations as options, and anywhere from a mega school for all your grades to different breakdowns of grade levels. And the options that rose to the top were a two-building configuration, one for pre-kindergarten through first grade and one through second through fifth grade. And you see the numbers in front of you. Those are very preliminary costs, but gives you an idea of the relationship between one option to the other. And these are based on the enrollment projections that we've received. So the peak enrollment for these different grade levels are listed in this table. The second option
And
was...
just on that piece, on the enrollment piece, the state does give us a 5% buffer above those enrollment projections that are figured into that
Right,
number.
so the numbers you see are 5% above what we were given in the report that we were handed. So a second option would be a pre-kindergarten and kindergarten school and a first through fifth grade school. So this would allow a smaller school for the younger children, which seemed to be very important to the committee. The third option would be a large school, pre-K through 2, and then continuing the use of Burns School as it is configured now. So in each of these options, the state will be supporting the larger building, the costs of construction and all project costs, and then the local community would most likely be covering the cost of the smaller building. So this information gave us the opportunity to understand what we're going to need for a site to support these buildings. So that leads us to the selection of the site that we will look at now.
Thanks, Norm.
Hi, I'm Jonah DeWaters from Oak Point Associates. I'm a civil engineer. We've been working really closely with Jeremy and the folks from the school department on this for about 9 months now. Kind of going to walk through the process here so you can get a sense of how we ended up at where we're at. First thing we did was take a look at potential sites. This is based on a combination of land ownership, property size, sellers that we knew were interested, and kind of look at this at a 100,000-foot level. You can see they're all over the town, all the red properties. As we continued to investigate the sites, we kind of ended up narrowing it down to 3 potential sites. And the way we do this is, there's a lot of information on here, apologies, but the way we do this is we start looking at different features of the sites, such as where they're located, what sort of traffic impacts they might have, utility availability, site size, environmental constraints, physical constraints, and try to really figure out which site checks the most boxes. In doing that, we ended up at 3 different sites. One of them is, we're calling it the Clare parcel. It's a combination of land owned by the city and a piece of land that is owned by an interested seller. It's over on off of Route 1, the corner of Route 1 and Millbrook Road. The next one is, we're calling it the Sweetser site. This is a wooded piece of property behind the Sweetser Administration Building on Pendleton Road. It's kind of between the Sweetser building and the Public Works building that was recently built. And then the third one is the back portion of the Saco Middle School property. This is behind the fields, so it's the wooded area behind the fields. It's worth noting the fields right now, there's a land and water conservation grant that those were put in with, so there's a bunch of deed restrictions and development restrictions associated with disturbing the field area. So this is the wooded area behind the fields. This is where the 3 sites are in relation to each other. So you can see number 1, the top right, that's the Clare site. Number 2 is the Sweetser site. And number 3 is the Saco Middle School site. And what's colored in on these is the entire piece of property. This isn't necessarily the whole piece that would be developed for each of these. This is just to get a sense of the scale of the entire site, including areas that aren't necessarily developable for one reason or another. So this is site number 1. This is the Clare site I was talking about. You can see the red on the plan there is the property line. The larger portion to the north is the portion that's owned by the city, and then the portion to the south is owned by an interested seller. As you look at this, you can see that we have 2 potential access points onto the site. One is from Millbrook Road on the south, and then one is from Route 1 on the west. The purple areas with the dark shaded shapes in the middle are kind of generally what the schools might look like, what the schools kind of shake out like. There's a solid chance, actually a guarantee, that the final shapes of the schools will look nothing like that. This is just kind of to give you a sense of scale. And the purple area around those is more or less the developed area when this is all done. So each of these sites will include the buildings, field space, parking, circulation, areas for service, playgrounds, hard courts. There's a lot of other site elements that at this point we haven't quite worked out. So this is how the Sweetser site looks. You can see that the site itself is about 80 acres, but the buildable area is more like 25, and this is because of some streams and deep areas, and there's quite a few wetlands on here. But this is kind of generally how it might shake out if we put schools on this site. There's, again, a lot of information here, but really the big points are, the good things about this site are it's close to an existing road network that can support a high level of traffic in Route 1. It's more or less flat for a bunch of it, the part where we could fit the schools. We didn't find any significant environmental constraints, like vernal pools are a big one, streams that we would have to work near, anything like that. The cons to this site are there are quite a bit of wetland areas. the way the site is shaped makes it really hard to develop in a way that gives you a lot of room for expansion, which is really important when you look at these schools because you're designing for a long-term solution. And if you have to do anything like add on to the schools, add parking, change circulation, it can be really tricky if you've squeezed yourself into a spot where it doesn't necessarily fit. And then there was some, you can kind of see it in the bottom picture here, there was some evidence of previous development or maybe some sort of dumping on there that may indicate that there might be some contaminated soils on the site. It's worth noting on all these sites, as we narrow down to the final site and start really looking at it, one of the things we do is soil testing and environmental assessments to make sure that we don't end up on a site that used to be some sort of hazardous waste dump or anything like that. That's part of this process. So at this point, as we walked through these sites, we're really more looking at anything that jumped out at us, as we walked around. Wasn't necessarily a comprehensive look. This is the Sweetser site, which we're calling site number 2. So you can see Public Works buildings to the north in this picture. The Sweetser Administration building is to the southwest. There's actually 2, possibly 3 access points to the site. One is from Pendleton Road. One is from Spring Hill Road, which is the road that the new Public Works building is off of. And there's a third access off of Industrial Road. In between a few of the developments, there's an existing easement that can be extended onto the site. And this easement was something that was worked on as part of the construction of the Public Works building to kind of maximize different access points and different ways to get into the site. You can see here the big red outline is actually only a portion of what Sweetser owns back there. And we wouldn't necessarily be approaching Sweetser about purchasing the entire red area. This is just kind of the area we picked to put the shapes on. As we move further in this process, we would be working with Sweetser to pick a spot that works for us and works for them with any of their future development plans. Similar to the Clare site, we walked around on the site, took a look. There are quite a few nice features about this site. One is that it's fairly large and wooded, which meant that it felt more secluded than it really was, which is kind of nice because you get access from a lot of different areas to a site that still felt like it was far away. It didn't feel like it was right next to the turnpike or anything like that, which is really kind of positive because you get the advantage of having all these high capacity roadways dumping out into one spot, but at the same time don't necessarily feel like you're in the middle of anything. Some of the other nice features here are the size. We have a lot more wiggle room on the site to fit things where we need to. We have 3 possible access points, which is really nice. The schools we usually do, you don't quite have that much availability for access. And there's plenty, the utilities are all available there. It's right near the Public Works, which is where the school buses are stored. So from a transportation convenience standpoint, it's really nice. There were some cons to the site. There are a decent amount of wetlands on it, and it's not really near any residential areas, which is similar to the Clare site, so that limits the potential for walkability. And then the other one with this is because of where it is, there's a chance that we might have to do more off-site improvements here than others. This is something that we've hired a traffic consultant to investigate, so we don't know yet what the extent of those off-site improvements are, but we will prior to this going to the referendum. And any off-site improvements that are required by the state, by the Department of Transportation, would be rolled into the school project and supported by the Department of Education accordingly. This is the third site, which is the Saco Middle School site. You can see here the Saco Middle School is to the north. The green area in the middle is the backfields I was talking about earlier. And then the area to the south is where the schools are. As we looked at this site, the biggest advantage here is the whole site's already owned by the city. So there's not, the land acquisition is less. But as we started to dig into the site, we noticed that the green area in the middle was built using land and water conservation funding, which basically puts a deed restriction on it that doesn't allow you to develop in it without rebuilding the field somewhere else, which really kind of limits the amount of developable area on the site and pushes us into the wooded area to the south. Also back there in the orange is a CMP corridor, so there's some high transmission lines through there. It's pretty wooded the topography in that wooded area is pretty tough back in there, and there's quite a few areas that the kids in the middle school worked pretty hard putting some trails in back there that we were able to use as we walked around. One of the other things you can see on this is down in the southwest corner, there's a big red circle. That's a significant vernal pool. So significant vernal pools require a higher level of permitting, and there can be some fees associated with impacting those, which is highly likely that it was something we would have to do if we decided to develop schools on this site. You can kind of see the dashed area on there. It gives you a sense of it. The whole site is 105 acres, but the buildable area is probably more like 24. As a reference point for both of these schools together, ideally we'd be looking at 30, minimum 30, more like 40 acres to develop the schools. So it really makes the development tricky. The other thing on this site that shows up on the next plan is, as we started to look at the traffic, knowing that currently the access to the site is off of Route 112, which is heavily trafficked and currently in the middle of a lot of traffic improvements and turnpike interchanges and a lot of stuff going on Route 112. It became clear to us pretty quickly that it wasn't realistic to think that this school could also be accessed from Route 112, which made us look at other ways to access the back part of the site. Route 5, which runs along the bottom of the screen there, there's a large piece of property that's owned by a private landowner. We approached them about acquisitions to see if they were interested in any sort of acquisition of the southern piece between the property line and Route 5, and they indicated to us that they were not interested in that at this time. So what that meant was, as we look at trying to figure out a way to access the site, we had to go through existing city-owned property and easements to get back there. And that's what that blue line is there that kind of starts on all the way to the west and kind of runs in a weird route to get there. And that's through an existing easement that the city has onto some city-owned property, and then out and around across the stream, and then through a subdivision. The city had retained an easement through the subdivision as a possible way to get in there. It's pretty long. That's well over a mile to get in there, and it's through some pretty rough terrain. So as we looked at it more and realized that makes access really, really tricky. So that's kind of a big con for this site that makes it a little less desirable than it looked on the face of it when we started this 9 months ago. This is a more comprehensive list of some of the pros and cons. As I said before, it is near high-capacity road networks. It's nice that it's adjacent to the existing middle school. It's nice that there potentially is some city-owned property nearby that we might be able to figure out a way to access. The back piece of the property between the vernal pool and the fields didn't seem to have any significant development restrictions other than this, like I said, the significant vernal pool on the south and the land and water conservation grants to the north. And it's already owned by the city, and it's near residences, which is nice. But as you start looking at what it would take to develop on this site, it starts to become less desirable. Like I said, the significant vernal pool, the access from Route 5 makes it tricky. Not necessarily having enough acreage to develop these schools in a way that both fits with current programs and fits with any future needs is tough. Looking at impacts to that land and water conservation grant funded field area makes it very difficult to develop on. And then further, the only utility availability is on Route 112. So there's a large utility run that you have to make from 112 all the way back through the site to get to where the schools will go. So after we looked at all this and went back to that matrix that had a lot of information on it and ranked all these sites, it became pretty clear to us, kind of look at right there, the bottom part, it became pretty clear to us that the most desirable site was going to be the Sweetser site. This is the site that Jeremy prepared the memo about, and this is the discussion we had at the previous public meeting. We had the informal vote on it, and it seemed like there was quite a bit of public support for this as well. So that brings us to where we are now, which is the Sweetser site. I think there's another. That's it. So that brings us to Jeremy's memo, which discusses how he ended up there. And I'll turn it over to Jeremy now and review the conclusions.
So again, now we're at the point where as we start to line up and move towards setting up for a straw poll, we need to make sure that we have some clear direction from the school committee to either move in looking further at the Sweetser site or to stop in our tracks and do something different. Because in order to meet that timeline of next June, we need to keep moving. And so, again, straw poll can lead you in a very different direction, but there's a lot of things that need to happen or should be happening simultaneously so that we can hit our target in June. So, discussion for the board.
Any discussion from the board? School Board Member LaFortune?
I didn't have anything at the
I
moment.
saw your hand ready. I thought you were going to, ready to go. Any discussion? School Board Member Gill.
I guess just to kick off the discussion here, just at a very high and base level, my understanding and in talking to some folks, when they ask about why are these 3 sites selected initially, essentially we are handicapped a little bit by accepting these state funds because the state has requirements on acreage for parcels that a new school could be developed on that make it almost impossible for us to find a location that's in a more neighborhood setting. Is that right?
So yes, there are several layers of requirements that come there from the state, with the first and foremost being the simple piece that you start with 20 acres, plus 1 acre for every 100 kids that would be in the state-approved project. And so as we started with, I believe we started with the possibility of 27-ish some odd properties in town. As you start to go through all of that piece, plus 3-phase power, water, sewer, traffic, as you sift all of those properties through your filter, some get pulled out pretty quickly. When you think about the current piece of land that's at Young School, you're only looking at about 10 acres on that site, and I may be off an acre high or an acre low. When you look at the current site of where Fairfield's at, when we studied that site just to see if we could add another grade level of students, it quickly becomes not possible. When you look at Burns, and we were saying, okay, we were studying the Burns site initially, and you have the same restrictions on the field out back on a very tight site. And then you started to look at where there was large acreage available, and now you're really looking at North Saco, way out North Saco, or way down Route 1. Now, this was also a very condensed version of the slide deck that was presented at the meeting in May, where you could look at the heat map of where students were located in the city and also thinking about possible growth. Now, we could have possible growth in North Saco, up Route 1. There's been some other areas about growth, and then that turns you to thinking about future traffic and/or traffic pattern discussions and thinking about how do we access, how will cars come in. And, you know, again, when you started to think about one of the key features of the suites or property is high-density roads, 3 possible access points, became, you know, one of those pieces. I mean, there's just not a 25-acre, 30-acre site sitting in the middle of a neighborhood right now that's available. And that's the other piece of this, is that properties sell so quickly here that developers have, you know, any of those open sites are just not available.
So then I guess the second part of that then is, if we don't accept these state funds, or it doesn't pass the referendum, the alternative is we could find another location for a school, but we would have to bond it using city funds, right? I mean, that's the decision that we're at, is
Correct.
if we want a neighborhood school, we're going to have to buy it ourselves.
Correct. And so when we talk a little bit more about the financing piece, when we get to the financing part of this, we roughly, as a placeholder, started to look at what does a 20-year bond look like. And so even with a $25 million bond for the local schools, you're looking at, and again, this is a placeholder because your bond counsel will work on, and your advisors will work on how that refunds and the payments, but you know, you're going to be at the $1.5 million plus or minus, heavier on some years and lower at the end. And we're going to talk a little bit about a strategy of what's in our current budget of how we might be able to absorb some of that moving forward. So if you were looking at a situation where all of this work was hitting the local taxpayers, you can add up $100 million pretty quickly there. And that would not be a number that we would love to see hitting the mill rate. And one of our biggest challenges is that, you know, we're putting a fair amount of money with a plan to, you know, we know that Saco Middle School is going to be standing at the end of all of this. And as we look at our other situations, we have a lot of need, and that's what challenges our community a little bit more than others.
Just one last question on the cost estimates. So let's just say for both of those schools, I mean, it's looking like it's $100 million basically, right? For those 2 configurations, those 2 options. Were those cost estimates, do we feel good about those cost estimates, one? And the second part of that is, if there are cost overruns after we go to the state and they approve us for whatever it is they want to be on the hook for, is there a mechanism for them to help with cost inflation, or does that fall back on the locals, on us, to cover any sort of cost increases?
So I know that in many of your projects, when you start to have those prices that either go up or down, you try to work within the project to make that hit the budget. Whether that's additions, subtractions to things, doing value engineering and doing things a little bit differently. And I think what makes it tough in this situation is that, and this could be good or bad, is we have experienced very high-priced building costs right now. That doesn't necessarily mean that those are the same building costs 3 years from now, depending on where the economy is. I came on the very tail end of the Biddeford High School renovation, and that was a very low-cost construction period of time where we didn't actually borrow all of the money that was approved because of materials and other costs. That doesn't mean that will happen in this process. It could go the other way, but you're hoping that you're working within those budget numbers.
I guess just from some of the state projects that I've worked on that have federal money, we're in a situation where, through obviously no fault of our own with COVID, that, project costs increased 20%, and the feds are saying, "Oh, sorry, we gave you that money. We approved it 3 years ago. There's nothing, you're on the hook for it." So just something as we move forward to keep in mind, I guess.
From a historical perspective, in 2016, 2017, then council voted 4-3 to not go out to bond for a couple of school projects that were proposed in favor of asking the school board to put our name on the list for contention in the state construction process, which Young School ended up number 4 out of 100. All 4 of our schools ended up somewhere in the 100, but Young School being number 4. So just for historical perspective. School Board Member LaFortune?
It was actually covered by the discussion that we just had.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Mr.
School Board
Mayor?
Member Richard?
Do we know when we might find out what the potential costs of the MDOT offsite improvements we might find out about that, or?
So that would be done through the traffic study piece of what would need to be made. And again, those off-site piece, correct me if I'm wrong, are tied into the state support for those projects, for the project, correct? So anything off-site would be part of state-funded part of that project. Maybe we'll know a little bit more early fall is what we're hoping for.
I had another question. Would it be worth looking into, I guess we'll hear back the costs associated with each entry point. Would it be worth potentially looking into utilizing each entry point if it's valuable as far as, traffic getting in and out? I don't know how that would work, but.
Yes, that piece will be played part of a scenario at some point. Because again, I think that whatever option we choose, and no matter what happens with any building, whether you're talking school, residential, whatever, traffic tends to be a very popular topic here. And so we'll want to look at ways, not only for the parents who are coming in and going and staff, but the biggest piece, that I worry about because it's part of our job is to think about how do you drop students at X hour at any location, go back down towards the shore and out to North Saco and around in the most efficient way, and then bring back to the middle school, because one of the things that we're going to work really hard over the next year for the middle school, and this was part of what we talked about with Mike last spring, is that historically there's kind of been this like flow of a 20-minute period of buses coming and going, and we want a situation that when buses arrive and kids drop, and when buses pick up, here we go, we dismiss and we're out the door. Because when you look at our instructional day for staff and teachers, one of the things that has always been a pet peeve of mine is the bus dismissal process of saying, that is such a waste of teacher time to have 15 to 20 minutes of a bus dismissal process, whether it's either transferring into instruction or kids, or planning time, or PLC time. That's a big piece of this process that we want to get right.
I'd be interested if there's any other schools across the nation too or any other jobs that you guys have done that might utilize, a school that has more than one, place where students come in and they depart from. In my history, I've only ever really seen the one, and to your point, as parents and teachers, it's a little bit of a time suck, so.
Well, I think actually when you look at one of the sites that you visited, which was an Oak Point project, is looking at the Falmouth campus that you have some access, and Norm, you guys could speak way more more intelligent than we, but you have some access out of that Falmouth campus in several different patterns that allows traffic to move pretty smoothly there. When you look at Sanford High School, which is a state-run project, they have 2 different entrances and exits so that they can send traffic to different parts of town. When we look at this particular site, you have the ability to send people to the interstate, either through the industrial park or going up Route 1 to another part of town. And I think what is interesting when you think about the potential for this site is that while you may have a friend in town that only lives a mile or a mile and a half from you, from each other, you would talk about how you would get there, and you may take very different routes to avoid different, traffic patterns throughout the city.
School Board Member Johnston.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a little bit of historical perspective on the work of the School Construction Committee. I've been serving on this committee currently and also on the program committee, or program subcommittee. But I want to reflect a little bit back to the first days of the construction committee. I don't know, was it 8 years ago, 10 years ago? It's been a while now. And the progress there got thwarted by a variety of events and concerns. But I think what I want to reflect on is that what we learned even way back then was that there really aren't very many options in terms of a site for this school. Even back 8 or 10 years ago, it was pretty obvious that there were a limited number of parcels that would be appropriate or appropriately positioned in terms of traffic and access to the roadways. Of course, the question of whether or not anybody wanted to sell the property that might be available. So there were a number of concerns, and it was really clear back then that we had very few options. And the committee that's currently been working on this has gone into great depth to try and pull together the best site that we have the option of having, short of going to, basically the border of Scarborough or something else. There really isn't much that's sort of centrally located. So I guess I'm just trying to reflect on the fact that the state's helping us with this project financially is very, in my opinion, very beneficial. But even if they were not involved, I don't think we would have a lot of options of the best place to site this. So I'm very much in support of the Sweetser site. I think it is our best option. I think it's a pretty good option, and I don't think we have too many others. To have the state on board to help us with the cost of it is a great benefit, and I just want to see us moving forward with this, and fairly quickly, because as the superintendent points out, we do have a timeline that we really need to be adhering to, and we don't have much time to waste. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? School Board Member Richard?
I'd just like to also add that I'm in support of the Sweetser location as well. I'd be remiss if I didn't state that. Are we going to have like a vote on moving this forward, or?
So what I'd like to have is that, again, the only thing you are voting on is to move the Sweetser location that we've recommended in the memo to the straw poll process. Haven't committed to anything, we're moving towards that process because we need to start getting as many things lined up so that we can move forward and stay within our timeline. Because when you think about the site process, if you go back to item number 1, in order to hit next June's timeline, we need to be at planning board, building and site concept design, site approval state board sometime in October.
School Board Member LaFortune?
So a follow-up to that. So in terms of the straw poll, what we're talking about tonight is really moving forward with the Sweetser site, and the straw poll is a straw poll of the three options that were presented, correct?
It is a straw poll for that site, which if you got there at the straw poll and it went down, Norm, you've done a lot more, many more buildings than I have.
When we get to the point where we have the straw poll, we will know much more about the site, and it'll be to say, this is the site for our school. We'll have all those studies completed, we'll have ideas of costs for developing the site, and it won't be a matter of A, B, or C. It's, this is the site, and yes, we agree, or no, we don't agree, that this is what we want to move forward with.
So in terms of the question that Jeff had asked, are we also looking this evening to not only move forward as we support the Sweetser site, but we support the Sweetser site and say option 2 as what we're ultimately straw polling? And the option 2 being the 2 buildings, a pre-K through K and a 1 through 5, with the state picking up the 1 through 5. That's what I'm wondering about, is the straw poll's purpose is the site, yes, but there's also, does the configuration come into the equation, or is that something that's later?
The grade configuration did drive the selection of the site, so yes.
Okay.
We are, I believe we are looking for your support on that as well.
That is correct, because there will be a second straw poll for the concept development that comes in that November to January, because once you have the site selected, then you'll go to the state board again for the concept approval, correct? Is that how it goes?
So to round it out then, what we're talking about is a straw poll for just the site, which supports all 3 of these configurations, and then we'll cover which of the 3 we land on at a future time, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
School Board Member Preble.
I'm going to make a jab at the motion if I can get this right. I'm going to give it a go. I move we move forward toward the process of the straw polls for the Sweetser site.
Second.
Motion was made by School Board Member Preble, second by School Board Member LaFortune, and close second, School Board Member Truman, and to move forward with the site selection of the Sweetser parcel. Any discussion?
I just want to
School
say
Board
that
Member Truman.
I just want to say that I'm excited about getting this moving and seeing this come to fruition. So yeah.
School Board Member LaFortune.
Yeah, I would echo that. Having participated in the earlier attempt at doing this several years ago, and knowing how difficult it was to not only fit something on the existing sites we have, as well as find a parcel that is as good as this one, this is an exciting prospect that we potentially have a piece of property that may become available to us for a school centrally located in town. It's a really exciting prospect, so I'm looking forward to this moving forward.
Thank you. Any further? School Board Member Preble?
I was just going to say, after attending being on parts of the building selection committee and also attending all of the updates to the community meetings, I'm in support of the Sweetser side as well. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to explore. I think we can certainly learn more about that site and kind of go from there, but I'm in support of it as well so far.
Thank you. Any further discussion? School Board Member Gale.
Just following up on School Board Member Preble's comments, I think it's an interesting site to explore as we move forward. I think it would be helpful, again, as we move together as a council and a school board, so that this, generational investment can be successful for all users, folks who want to drive there, folks who want to bike there, walk there, but that'll need to happen in partnership, so I hope we can continue to move forward with that as we explore this option.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Roll call vote. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Richard?
Yes.
School Board Member LaFortune?
Yes.
School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman?
Yes.
School Board Member Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. So that takes care of, I think, the site selection memo, item E2, the Oak Point update, item E4, the construction timeline, and now I think we'll hear about E3, the funding presentation from Drummond Woodson.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and school board members. I'm Bill Stockmeyer from law firm of Drummond Woodson. My practice, I'm the head of the public finance practice at Drummond Woodson, and I work on school construction projects, both locally funded and state funded all over the state, as well as other projects by municipalities for all of their needs. Am I coming through okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. What I thought I'd talk about is to give you some idea of how the state-funded school construction program works. In my view, it's probably one of the Cadillac programs in the country once you get approved, which is a arduous task because they're not making enough money for everybody, so getting your project on the state-funded list is the hard part. But once you're on the list, I think as we go through this, hopefully the take-home will be really an understanding of the state support for the grade 1 through 5 school, okay? So in simple terms, not only what will it cost, but what will it cost us, right? So next slide. Just by way of background, Superintendent Ray asked me to focus on Plan Option 2, as a sort of a working number, working model illustration. And let me emphasize here that what you have here are what I call working numbers. These aren't yet estimates. I mean, no one has really applied hard numbers to construction markets and everything, but one thing I've learned over the years is just because you don't know what a number is doesn't mean it's zero, right? So for illustrative purposes, this is a very helpful exercise, okay? And I was asked to use the numbers assigned right now as working numbers for Plan Option 2, and just by way of review, for a pre-K to K school, 25 to 30 million is the working number, and for the grade 1 to 5 school that I'm going to focus on, the working number is, in purple, is 76 million, of which what we call the state-local portion is 71 million, and the local-only portion is 5 million. And if you find my colors confusing, just think in terms of blue being like water and therefore relief, state subsidy, red being something we do need to be concerned about, will require some effort, and purple, of course, is when you put red and blue together, that's the overall project. So that's how my mind works, and if I were better at PowerPoint, I'd have fancier diagrams to do that, but you get what you have. So what will the $76 million project cost us, the grade 1 through 5 school? Next slide, please. So by way of background first, we've talked a little bit about these approvals. And just to review what they are, site approval, well, you've just taken a major decision towards moving towards site approval, the next step being the straw poll of the voters to demonstrate to the state that there's voter interest in the project at that site, and then site approval by the State Board of Education. Then concept approval, that's the stage at which the project budget and the project concept is set. And let me just address a question that came up about, does the state help if everything goes off the rails and costs are way too high? And Superintendent Ray was exactly right that the state will put you through a ringer a little bit and force you to value engineer the project and get it down. But I have also worked on projects in extreme situations where there's actually been a second bond referendum on supplemental costs. This happened up in Caribou. Something slightly different happened in Saco, but Saco had a second project coming through, and some excess costs from the first project were deemed close enough to be part of the second project to be added to the second project. So there are extreme instances where the state participates. I would say that one of the really admirable things about the State Department of Education are the dedication of the people in this project. I'm sure they try to drive as hard a bargain as they can with you and with your architects who are pressing your case for state support, but they genuinely are invested in seeing this program be successful. And I think that's why, in these very extreme situations, they've actually conceded that more money needed to come in. They don't want to see any school in this program fail. So I'll say that. So the project budget gets set at concept approval, and then within 6 months, you're supposed to have the referendum by the city voters in this case. Sorry, I should have edited that. City voters. And that's the authorization of the project financing, right? First, so what's unique about, not unique, but what's different about Saco is a charter municipality, and so the order of bonding is the reverse of a school district. So the state program is set up really more for a school district where after concept approval, the school board might immediately call a referendum of the voters, and only after the referendum would the school board approve issuing the bonds. Well, here we have a city, the council issues the bonds. It has a very typical bonding process under its charter where there are public hearings and first and second readings, and that takes a certain period of time, and the referendum comes afterwards. But the state process really is more built towards the district process. It's just not a great fit and not a great deal we can do about it either. What will happen in Saco is after a concept approval, we'll first have to get council approval of the project bond amount and to send the project out to referendum and then get to that local referendum approval. That's how it will work here. Following that, following the referendum is really when most of the design work occurs, and that goes to the State Board for final design and funding approval, at which point the completed design is approved to go out to bid, and then, this hasn't been a problem these days, but in the old days when bids came in low, there was a little pot of money for the local schools to spend for some extras for the project at state expense, and the state tightened up the process a little bit, and if bids comes in low, well, that's why I say it hasn't been a problem lately, you could have the funding reduced to meet the lower bid by the Commissioner of Education. So that's a little tweak to the budget after the bids are in. So those are the state approvals along with the major local approval. Next slide. So in terms of establishing the project budget, after site approval, what will happen is the school department, the project architect, Norm and the folks at Oak Point, and the Department of Education will develop the project budget. And it's concept approval, the state board will approve that budget, and those are the two portions of the budget that I mentioned. The state-local portion, which our working number is $71 million, and the local-only portion, and our working number for the grade 1 to 5 school is $5 million. Local-only includes such things as, most typically, the state will participate in the cost of real estate up to and not in excess of the average of 2 appraisals. Some owners won't sell the property for the appraised value. If that happens, there's a cost increment. That would be a local-only cost. Very commonly, the school district wants a larger gym or other facility then the state will subsidize. That's another example of a cost that might be over on the local-only portion. And then finally, and not too often, sometimes there's a need for an emergency shelter, which is more of a city need than a school need, and they want to attach it to the building, so something like that. So those are just some examples. The current working number for local-only in Saco is $5 million, which is 6.6% of the working number total of $76 million. Next slide. So the 3 sources of funds for the new school as you progress through. The first is you have to fund the project. You have to pay primarily the architect for the design costs and engineering and related studies. And at this point, under the state process, it's early to fund project costs with bonds. So in order to get to a referendum vote, get to council approval in this case, and a referendum vote, there has to be some sort of funding source, whether that's the school operating budget, whether that's reserve funds, whatever that might be. But importantly, it's important to recognize that done properly, local funds may be paid back from amounts borrowed, okay, for the project. So you can reimburse the accounts used. Alternatively, if you have money that you want to use to reduce the local-only portion of the project ultimately, that early money can be expended for the early project costs, paid back, and then be used to reduce the local-only portion of the bonding. So you have some options there. After the referendum, the city can issue temporary notes, which are called bond anticipation notes, or BANs. So notes issued in anticipation of a permanent long-term bond. So the acronym is BANs. After it's approved at referendum, the city can issue those temporary notes. And again, those temporary notes can be used to reimburse local funds expended and to pay project costs going forward until the city issues its bonds. For the state-local portion of the project, the bonds are required to be 20-year bonds. The city has more flexibility for the local-only portion of the bonding. Some FAQs. Next slide, please. So just for, most people, what are bonds and bans? So these are obviously debt obligations. When we say that they're general obligation bonds, what we mean is it's supported by the city's full faith and credit, and which essentially means its authority to raise taxes. So surprisingly to some people, the collateral, if you will, for the repayment of the bonds is not the school. The collateral is the city's promise to raise taxes, which turns out to be a lot better collateral than real estate because you don't have to figure out what to do with the real estate, right? And of course, the city is going to pay its bonds. Bans, as I mentioned, provide temporary financing. The bonds will repay or refund the bans, including the ban interest. So when we say that bonds are issued or bonds are sold, all we mean is the money is borrowed, right? Okay. Just different terminology. Saco has a financial advisor that advises the city on the method and timing of bond sales, as well as how to structure the bond sale to mitigate some of the budgetary impact of initial bond payments. Just one aspect of the state-supported project, the bonds have to have equal annual principal payments. So we're all familiar with our mortgage payments, right? Those are equal monthly payments, okay? That's different from equal principal payments, all right? Equal principal payments pays down the principal much faster. We've all noticed when we're paying off our house how long it takes to pay down any principal at all, right? That's because we have equal blended payments. For the state-supported portion of the bonds, those are going to be equal principal payments, which pays down the principal much more rapidly, thereby reducing the total interest cost of the state-local bonds, but creating a higher initial payment. So the payments, when principal payments are equal, the payments each year go down because the interest on the declining principal is less and less, typically. So just a few points about those bonds. Next slide, please. So what will it cost us? So let's look at our hypothetical example, a hypothetical city issuing hypothetical bonds for a hypothetical project which has a state-local share of 71 million and 5 million. And so what will the cost be and what's the budget impact of those two bond payments? And I'm not really going to talk about the pre-K to K school, but I just didn't want to forget that piece. That obviously is at local expense also, and if you're really good at math, you'll know we're talking about the 5 million piece for the local-only portion of the grade 1 through 5 school, and 25 million for pre-K to K is 5 times 5 million, right? So in the back of your mind, you're wondering what the pre-K to K school, multiply the 5 million piece by 5 or 6, and that'll be the 25 to 30 million for the pre-K to 5 school. But I wanted to focus on the grade 1 to 5 school because it's really an understanding of the funding formula that I'd like to convey for you here tonight. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So here is our hypothetical construction budget, a state-supported grade 1 through 5 school. We have a state-local share of 71 million. We have a local-only share of 5 million, and a total of 76 million altogether. And just for percentages, so we're looking at the state-local share being 93.4% of the total bonding, and the local-only share being only 6.6% of the total bonding. Okay? Again, we're not talking about the pre-K to K right now. So there are two impacts. There's a budget impact and a tax impact, and those are two very, very different things. A budget impact increases your budget, but to the extent you have state subsidy, there's no tax impact, right? So budget can go up, but if the subsidy goes up, no tax, no local tax impact. So it's important to distinguish between those two things. And to understand this, remember I said that the payments step down, starting with the initial principal payment on the bond, with the interest on the 76 million. The next payment is paid, and it's interest on a smaller amount, so the payments go down each year. So to get at the budgetary impact, we want to look at the first year of principal repayment on the 20-year, $76 million bonds for our hypothetical grade 1 through 5 elementary school. That's the maximum impact. And based on some numbers that the city's financial advisor sent me, the total budget impact, the maximum, that would be the year of the first principal payment, that's $7,220,000. But again, that's the budget impact, not the tax impact, okay? We have those two things straight. So how much will it cost us? Next slide. And the answer, well, again, the state-local portion is 93.4% of the total. So if the first bond payment of maximum impact is $7,220,000, the state-local portion of that bond is $6,743,480, using our 93.4%. So how much will the $6 million, so that's the annual debt payment, the first big annual debt payment when you have your first principal payment, how much will that piece of it, the 93.4% piece of it, cost us? And the answer, I think, is on the next slide. And the answer is 0. So how can this be? So I was doing this a few weeks ago for SAD 49 up in Fairfield, and Paula Gravel in the Department of Education, who's the school finance manager, was kind enough to send me an email in which she wrote, the addition of debt service at this time only increases the total cost and the state contribution with, in the case of SCD 49, 4 towns. Currently, at the mill expectation amount, there's no increase to the required local contribution. Saco, likewise, is at the mill expectation amount. Let me just tell you a little bit about what that means, because I know you see these computer spreadsheets, or it's like a mystery to most people. So you have a certain quantum of costs that qualify for state subsidy, right? And then you have costs that don't. Your additional local funds piece of your budget, right? But the EPS costs, the essential programs and costs, are the ones that qualify for subsidy. And the state runs into formula, and you have a certain level of costs that qualify. So the state says, well, in the first instance, you're going to pay for it. So imagine a graduated cylinder, and you've got to get up to this line, okay? But what the state says, so you start filling with water, okay, because oil floats on water. So you start filling, but the state has a mercy rule. It says, at a certain level, that's a maximum tax effort you're required to pay towards those EPS costs, right? So how does the state make up the difference? It pours in money for funding. That's the oil, right? And so I believe in Saco, you have about $36 million in EPS costs, and you're roughly a 50% receiver, as it turns out. So at the statewide mill rate, that's all you can be required to pay towards the qualifying costs. Well, if you add a $6.7 million bond payment to the $36 million, now the graduated cylinder is much taller. So that's a little scarier, all right? We got to fill up that graduated cylinder another $6.7 million. But watch, remember, you are already at the maximum tax effort. You don't have to pay another dollar towards the state local costs, all other things being equal. That's just more water more oil that goes on top of the water in the formula. Now, at the end of the day, will you still be paying a percentage of the state and local costs? Sure. So in that sense, yes, you're paying a share of that bond, but the dollar amount you're paying is exactly the same as you were paying beforehand. It's a lower percentage. And I think that's a more fair way to look at what's happening here. That as far as Saco goes, because you're not anywhere near a minimum receiver, okay, you're at a 50% state funding contribution, the fairest way to look at it is the state is matching that portion of the bond payment dollar for dollar by a subsidy increase. Okay? So, but we're not done. So we still have on the next slide, well, we're not done. To summarize, Saco's already paying the maximum tax effort. So when you add state-approved debt to the approved DPS costs, so those are the debt payments, that doesn't change the maximum. The maximum is still the statewide mill rate times your property valuation. And there are some assumptions, but I can tell you an awful lot would have to change incredibly radically for that to stop being true in the 20 years of the bond payments. So as long as that remains the case, under the current formula, they could tweak the formula, they'd have to change an awful lot for this to be impacted. The impact of the state local debt payment would be zero on the Saco taxpayers for the 20-year bond term. Oh, one more assumption, we worry about curtailment, right? We hear about these, what if the state decides it can't afford to support schools anymore? This happened, I believe, in around 2000. I think it also happened around, it seemed to happen about every 7 or 8 years. In my experience, since, I don't know, 1993 or 4, every time the state has, this is when the state announces, oh, by the way, in February, we're cutting your state subsidy, X percent, everybody. Now what do we do? Well, every time it's done that, it has not cut the debt service payment to municipalities. It has preserved that because, again, I think the DOE is highly committed to that school construction program. So, and this has happened, I would say 5 or 6 times in my career. I'm aware of curtailments, so that's extreme stress on the state. The state has maintained subsidy of the bonds that are outstanding for state-approved projects. So let's look at the local-only bond. That's all we have left to do. So we're using, again, a $5 million local-only bond in our hypothetical, which I said was 6.6% of the $76 million total. And at the estimated interest rate that the city's financial advisor provided, the principal payments will be $250,000 a year for 20 years, and the interest of the first year of principal payment will be $225,000. That's the year of highest payment. The tax impact, therefore, is $475,000. That will be the maximum tax impact, and because the tax impact of the state local portion was 0, that is the tax impact of the grade 1 to 5 school, and that will go down each year as principal balance declines. And the city, the school department, and the financial advisor, I'm sure, will all be working together to figure out ways to mitigate even that maximum impact. Next slide, please. Okay, so what percentage are we talking about? So this year, these are your tax dollars going for education, local share of EPS, additional local, even adult education, $29 million plus. The first year bond payment is $475,000. That's a tax increase for the grade K through 1 through 5 school, a $76 million school, tax increase in the year of maximum impact of 1.63%. Next slide. So just to summarize, the total bonded debt is $76 million. The tax impact of the $71 million state local funded piece is 0 in Saco. Tax impact of the $5 million piece is $475,000. State ends up paying 93.4% of the debt service, and the tax impact in the year of maximum impact is 1.63%. I think, Jeremy, the next slide is yours.
Yes, so again, as you look at budget strategy over time and you know that you're going to have a possibility of looking at a consideration of a $20-ish million bond if we were doing the local portion of the pre-K school on ourselves, it's really would be wise of us as a school committee and as a city council to begin to think about the timing of when those payments come on. And I have been in a situation where when the local mill payment in Biddeford hit the budget as they worked at the high school, that was, while everybody was very excited about having a new school, you have the school and then the payment comes in, just kind of like when you buy anything in life and you get excited about it and then, oh, well, now the payment's here every single month. But some of the things that we can do here as a group is continue on some really good decisions and partnerships that we started this fall, and again, between this board and the city council to think about debt service in the last two budgets. Not debt service, but capital improvements in the last two budgets is something that we really should plan for thoughtfully, because we have a unique opportunity here to have a state-funded project, possibly another new school, and have the ability to ramp up our capital spending at Saco Middle School so that when you come out on the back end of this, you're in a situation where, okay, now we start to look around 3 buildings and we're feeling really good about them. And so as you look at this slide, a couple of things can be in place. And I want to say that not all of these would be the same titles, and not necessarily all of these would be expenditures, but they could be budgeted items. They could be budgeted items for a future capital reserve account. But if you look at the $500,000 that we have in capital projects right now, we know that we're fixing the roof. We know that in a couple of more cycles of the budget process, the Saco Middle School roof will be renewed. We have revolving renovation funds that cover a majority of the air handling upgrades at Saco Middle School, but because they have a $1 million project limit, we know that there's some outside of that that we will have to work on by ourselves. The council was outstanding in looking at new furniture and painting for Saco Middle School, and certainly we won't need new furniture and painting every year, but they've put $400,000, $600,000 this year, and in future years, if we were disciplined enough to put $4,000 into other upgrades or capital reserves to keep that budget number stable, when we come to the time when the bond payment would hit, that's how we cut back on some of those things to help offset that piece. When we look at Toddle Inn has 3 years left on the pre-K lease. And so you can look at that as 262, 267, 272. Those are not all, and there's other costs on top of that that I put as $150,000, and that's probably on the low end, and that's just from extra busing, cafeteria, maintenance, facilities, staffing that gets paid for on the Toddle Inn piece. Now, on the end of that facility, we will have choices of the community. You have the ability to re-up for another 5 years, which you wouldn't need the building that long, or you think about some of the local pieces. We have 4 classrooms that is currently being built at Young School. Certainly we're going to need for extra classroom space this year, but that may not be the situation in the future. So as we move towards the end of that lease, we can think about how we use that space and maybe some other spaces in the city that would alleviate the need for that payment. At the same time, thinking about the city council, school committee working together, and again, not maybe 100% putting that all into capital projects, but to putting that into reserve accounts for future pieces. You can easily see that there is a pot of money as we move through the years, and you're looking at $1.3 million in FY27, if you kept those budget figures the same, that could be freed up and removed from your general local budget and replaced with the local bond payment for new school construction. And that would be done with leaving still $300,000 in a capital line. And I suspect that closing of buildings and the other buildings and the reconfiguration would actually be higher than $200,000. I'm just using very rough numbers, because when you go from 4 buildings to 2 buildings, you're going to have savings, and that comes from phones, internet, power, cleaning supplies, all of those pieces that add up, can add up pretty quickly. And so the work that we will have to do on this group and with the city council together is to think about where we are each year tax commitment-wise, and developing that strategy so that if this goes through and if we make these investments in our building to put Saco into, again, a great capital infrastructure space, we may be able to do this by creating a lot of improvements at Saco Middle School, possibly having a capital reserve account, and being able to have major reductions from local spending on issues that could be put towards that bond payment, and not see a big swing in the mill rate throughout that process. And that's ideally what will happen in a situation, is that you won't get a swing. You will have pre-planned this well enough to provide some relief initially, and then down the road. So I know that's a ton of information about the financing of schools, but we felt it was very important to start having some of those discussions. And certainly Bill or myself could take any questions that the board may have.
Any questions? School Board Member Johnston?
I'm sure there are many questions that we could ask, but one very simple one. My question is about the 20-year bond. Is this typically a 20-year bond, or?
For the state-local piece, it will have to be a 20-year bond by rule, and for the local only, there will be some flexibility. You know, obviously, the longer the bond term, the lower the budgetary impact, but the higher the total interest cost, so those things all have to be balanced.
Any further questions? Seeing no further questions, thank you very much. That brings us to item F on the agenda, which is the ELA word study memo, ESSER funded. It's in your packet. And we'll hear from Assistant Superintendent Parkhurst. Thank you.
Thank you. This memo just outlines the work of the ELA curriculum design team this year in looking at word study resources for our K through 5 teachers to utilize. The conclusion of that committee was to do some pilot work in this school year with 2 different resources. One of those resources is only available for K2 students, and that's the units of study phonics. That dovetails with the units of study reading and writing resources that are used for K5 students. That program does not extend to the 3rd through 5th grades at this point in time. So the committee is recommending that our 3 through 5 teachers look exclusively at piloting Fontes and Pinnell word study, which in a review of over 23 different resources seemed to be the overwhelming choice of the teaching staff and in looking at what was available on the market. This is considered a pilot because we are still feeling as a curriculum design team like this is such a critical piece of foundational skills for students that we kind of want to utilize these resources for a full year before we commit for a longer period of time to utilizing either one of these resources. And there was quite a bit of discussion on the committee with respect to the benefits of having the units of study, which is consistent with our reading and writing at K2, versus the benefits of having a word study program K through 5 that was consistent across the spectrum. So we would like to utilize this school year to really dive more deeply into those resources and then make an informed decision about long-term impacts. Because foundational skills are so critical and were part of some of the learning loss that was experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic, the funding of the pilot program was written into the ESSER grant. So we already allocated those funds through that federal grant prior to determining which resources we wanted to use. It's a really high-level overview. There's more detail in the backup, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the board? Seeing no questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That brings us to item G, the refugee resettlement update, and that is Superintendent Ray.
Okay, I think that one of the processes that you guys will continue to see in every board agenda for a while will be a memo that continues to build, much like the one that's in there, that talks about any of the updates, any of the new things that we are learning throughout the process, with welcoming the newcomers into our community. Every Thursday morning at 9 a.m., and Bill's on some of those meetings with us, we tend to meet as a fairly large group of representatives from York County, Catholic Charities, City of Portland, DOE, Governor's Office, about all of the things that are happening. So what I can update you on this week is that the first 40% of families have started to move into the hotel rooms. Those families are coming from the the Best Western in Yarmouth. And in that number, Stacy ran numbers for us the other day, and there's like 22 high school kids, and then approximately, 9 kids at one grade level, 6 at another. Challenge becomes housing, and that at any point in time, some of those families may find permanent housing, which would then remove them from the hotel and new families would come. Now, what we do know is that with this first 40% that is settling here this week, we will receive another 40% of the population starting on August 19th. Then the plan, as it sits right now, is to receive the last 20% of the population September 19th. Tomorrow morning, we're going to have a discussion about how September 19th is not a good plan for anybody. It's not a good plan for the Saco schools, the city of Saco, or any of the children who possibly would be starting a school in another community and then changing 3 weeks in. And we need to figure that piece out because our teachers deserve the opportunity to start school with the kids that they know will be in their classrooms. And we've got to work really hard to do that, even if that means that we know who the 20% is and we're sending a bus somewhere to make that happen, because all of the pieces about getting a classroom up and running is very important during those first couple of weeks of school. Now, that doesn't mean that we will make really good plans and things will change. As of even today, I know that one of the hotels that had possibly been on the list from a community to come to Saco, there may be some changes in that as some housing may come online in that community, which would mean kids who had started school in that community may go into some permanent housing, and we may be looking and receiving different students. There's 100 rooms that are available, and it seems like a situation where throughout the year they will definitely have families who will be moving in and out of Saco. Now, we had a meeting with Bill the other day and Brian to talk about, we know that there are many unbudgeted costs that will go along with this, and in the memo you have a sketch of what some of those costs may be as we move forward, and it's a very rough estimate, and it will be a move-in a moving target throughout the year. We will need to have a meeting with the city council to look at a special budget amendment for consideration, because certainly we've had a situation where we have an approved budget here, and we're not, without some sort of emergency or non-emergency. I am not quite sure, Bill, if we understood whether this is an emergency situation or how that works.
City administrator is checking with legal
Yeah.
counsel to see how this works with the current charter situation of Section 4 and Section 6.
And so we'll need to look at that piece to figure out how we fund some of those situations. Other challenges that we have that we are starting to begin to work through is there has been some generous support from whether it's our own faculty or local churches and other businesses who are stepping forward, trying to make sure that our kids have some access to recreation that will be there. Look at how we bring our staff to the hotel to start the registration process is going to be very important. Sue worked really quickly and was able to get the hotel to be a summer lunch site, which is going to be important because we're going to be able to feed kiddos this summer. But we have a lot of challenges and opportunities in front of us that we'll be working through. And I think what can be the most frustrating part is that even the best laid plans will probably require a lot of pivoting throughout the next 6 to 8 weeks and throughout the year because things change very quickly. One of the pieces that we will have to consider is it's not a situation where all kids that come are evenly spread between each grade level throughout. And we know that we currently, it appears that based off the information that we are going to have a bump in grade 1. And so we've got to talk about that situation. At the same time, early in August, we will be, as we move through and get more information about the families that are coming, we'll be running simultaneously class sizes at Young School and Fairfield School. So if we have a situation that says, okay, 5 kids or 10 kids added to grade 2 creates classrooms of 22, let's say, while looking at Fairfield and saying, well, oh, the class sizes are only 17, we may want to have some opportunities for whether it's existing students or new students to have some balance, because I think one of the pieces that we need to be very thoughtful of is just the impact that it will have on our teaching staff and really trying to do our best to keep balanced class sizes to the best of our ability at our elementary schools. Now, when it comes to Burns School, that becomes a little bit more challenging for us because at the end of the day, we just don't have extra classrooms there. And we would like to do everything that would be humanly possible for us to not have to create another classroom, because that means that things like UAs and other pieces may be displaced from their room, and that's not good for anybody either. So there's so much to this with a lot of moving parts, and we're going to do our best to keep you as updated as possible. Looking, I think, Bill, when we spoke the other day, we were talking about that meeting. I believe you said we were thinking late August, September, some point to have that piece roll out. And I would certainly take any questions, either I can answer, Meg or Chris, about where we're at from the board.
Any questions from the board? School Board Member LaFortune.
So it's not necessarily a question, it's more of a comment from, based on the numbers that are in here. So at this time, the estimated costs are costs that we will be shouldering on our own, as in there's no plan for additional funding coming our way, correct?
So, yeah, that's kind of correct. Bill has reached out to the governor's office. I have been in constant contact with the DOE each and every week, and on our Thursday morning meetings, at the end of every meeting, I think so far, I have reminded them about the cost that this has to the locals, and that we have to be more thoughtful about that. Now, there's $500,000 that is available sitting at the DOE, and there has been some talk about maybe some relief funds that could become available. However, those definitely, $500,000 for the entire state is not going to go very far, because when you look at the number of students that would be coming here, which would be approximately 120 to 150, and the city of South Portland had 480 last year. That were refugee move-ins. So $500,000 isn't going to go very far. Yes, these are upfront costs, and it certainly will not replace that, but it will be important for us to recognize that over the next 3 years of EPS funding, you will have a higher student count that will figure into the 3-year average. Now, will that bring back this amount of money? No. Actually, it will probably only soften the decrease that we get from declining enrollments and higher property values through that process. But from the mayor's office to the superintendent's office, we are trying to work with the state for any possible way to help them understand the unique situation that Saco has with a 9 through 12 school that is paid on a tuition basis versus where it's kind of like a different pre-K through 12 full setup system. We operate differently. We have different costs associated with that, and that creates a unique situation here in this community.
Any other questions on this item? School Board Member Johnston?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I have a couple of things. The first one was I wanted to ask the superintendent, because I may not have understood this correctly, in terms of classroom sizes or in terms of sort of moving students around in order to accommodate the smaller, keep the classroom small enough. I'm sorry, Mr. Superintendent, but the thought that came into my mind is that the students that are already enrolled and have been told who their teachers are going to be for next year, does this somehow affect, if we're moving kids around, does this affect them at all? Or how would you suspect it would?
So Beth, we had those conversations with principals this spring, knowing that this was, no parent or child is going to want a phone call saying, hey, you have a new classroom teacher in the fall. So a couple of things that we've kind of anticipated through this process is, one, any students who have moved in to the community or moved out, we have kind of held those slots and not assigned any new students to a classroom yet. Looking at, again, what we have for estimated enrollments based off the data that we have, we'll then funnel that piece into it. At the same time, we know that teachers sometimes come and go during the summertime. So when we have a teacher who has resigned their position or moved on or retired or something, there hasn't been a teacher assigned yet, we're kind of holding that, looking at, okay, how do we create the least amount of movement for families? Because again, it goes back to nobody wants to receive the call in August to say, this is what's happened. So we're trying to minimize that impact as much as possible throughout this. Also paying attention, and as you can see, based off the numbers that we have on the memo, looking at what average class size district-wide would be. And so if there's a scenario where young schools' class sizes go way out of proportion, and if there are some lower spots at Fairfield, that's when we will look either towards the newcomer population, or there may be some situations where it just works out really good for an existing young school family to say, you know what, this would work out for me to free up the spot and head over to Fairfield because it works for my daycare or something. So we may have some abilities to provide some options to minimize that piece. But we tried to put some foresight into making sure that we didn't have to switch 200 kids' teachers' assignments throughout. And certainly, I know what parents would feel, and I know how it would go over at my house as well, with my child and my wife, as we talked about that piece. So we're really going to try to not do that, if at all possible. And there may be some parents who say, hey, you know, it's okay, this works out for us. And if there's parents who are out there listening to help us with, you know, some of these obstacles, please reach out to the principals, because that would be really helpful to us.
Well, thank you for that. It sounds like it will be a challenge, perhaps, in any case. I guess another question that I had was, it seems it is, how do I put this? My curiosity is around how it actually happened that Saco is taking, apparently the students that are coming to us are coming from other communities around us. And I'm wondering how it is that they aren't staying in the communities that they were in before, or what mechanism, you know, has brought this situation to us. I know that's a complicated question perhaps, but I think the community as a whole is probably going to need to understand that better. Is there some sort of an answer that won't take you forever?
Now, you know me, Beth. You know all of my answers take a long time.
No, I'm not saying that at all. It's a complicated situation.
I'm joking with you, Beth. Especially if you ask a budget question, because you know that's where I really like to go. But in this situation, this is not necessarily a local decision of anything that's happened here. You have a property owner who had either availability, business property owner. And the resettlement issues, to my understanding, and again, this is my understanding, and this is what I believe in. Bill, you might be able to add into parts of this, is that these are managed by the city of Portland. When we are dealing with any of the data, we are dealing with the city of Portland, who executed the contract. I believe the city of Portland executed the contract for the state of Maine with the Saco property owner. And in simplest terms, Beth, that's kind of what it is. There was an amount of money that was and is managed by the city of Portland. Any of all of the information that comes our way is coming from the city of Portland here. What happened at other locations, I don't know. I'm assuming that at some point in time, there was a financial decision of where to place kids, capacity, families, et cetera, that came into play. My understanding is that any of the general assistance pieces that goes along with this stays with the city of Portland, but the schooling piece becomes something that we now take on operationally.
I think your statement that the city of Portland contracted with the inn in Saco is a very interesting piece, and I think that I'll just leave it at that. But I do have a lot of, I guess, questions around how the procedural issues, I guess, of this situation. But I think I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, I don't know any more other than that. And also, Meg, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, then the city of Portland also contracted with Catholic Charities to be the overseers of the hotel, right? Essentially.
And this is not uncommon. The city of Portland has done this in other communities as well. So it's I wouldn't say it's common, but it's not uncommon. School Board Member LaFortune.
So just following up on that, that's the part in all of this that I'm probably struggling with the most, is the procedural part. And I know you're the messenger, this is not directed at you, but the idea that the city of Portland has done this in other places should not be taken as any kind of comfort in this. I'm really struggling with how one municipality can reach out and impact another like this without actually having a municipality-to-municipality conversation. I understand that there's a lot of shifting sands with this, and it's really hard to wrap your arms around it. But I don't think that it's, at least from the outside looking in, and I say from the outside looking into the thought process that either the state or the city of Portland have gone through with this, understanding how they could look at doing what has happened and thinking that it is going to work for the community of Saco or any other community where this has occurred, but more importantly, to all of the people that they, from my understanding, uprooted with very little notice to move them to Saco, like with a day's notice. I'm looking at this whole picture and being like, how did this happen this way? It's just, that's the part that I'm struggling with, is just the process of somebody somewhere thought that just doing this was somehow going to check a box and problem solved, move on. It's mind-blowing to me.
Well, I don't think myself, nor Superintendent Ray, nor City Administrator Canrath can look into the minds of other people in the city of Portland or the governor's office and tell you why they chose this hotel versus that hotel, or this community versus that community. The long and short of it is, 2 months ago, they came to us and said, hey, we're coming to your town, and we're contracting with this business who wants our business. That's the long and short of it. There's no, I don't know that there's hidden motives or hidden agendas. That's just the way it's worked out. Sure, we would have liked more notice as we ended one school year and went into a budget session and went into a referendum on that budget with the local community members. Sure, we would have liked to know more information up front, but unfortunately, that's not the deal that's presented itself, and we have to deal with the issues as they come. So, School Board Member.
And I would just like to say with that, I think the hardest part for me on all of this is that with more engagement up front, we could do such a much better job. Like, that's the piece to me, is to say that it's hard on, where we are at the 20th of July, to know that 6 weeks from now, I really don't know how to program. And I know that Meg and Chris had great conversations with some of our staff this week about, all of the pieces, and people are anxious and want to know things and just don't have a lot of answers out there, other than we will make it happen, we'll do the best that we can, and we will be successful. But I suspect there will be some growing pains during the process.
School Board Member Gale.
Just a quick question. Do we know if there are any other hotels or establishments that have signed up? I guess there's some list or something that Portland has, or if there's anything on the horizon in addition to this location?
I can tell you that I'm not aware of any other hotels in the current mix. Superintendent Ray, are you aware of any other hotels in the mix?
I am not, but that would definitely create another one of those pivot points for us. And so I don't believe so. And I would answer this question, my answer would be, we have met every single week, and I would be extremely disappointed in any transparency if that happened with the relationships that we're building. And I think we've developed a good working relationship, be it on Zoom, with a group, and so that I hope that wouldn't be something that would happen, because again, planning, just the planning.
School Board Member Archie?
I think that you guys have been doing really great considering the time frame. I'm frankly shocked that another municipality has the audacity to do this to us. But do we have an understanding as to how long the contract is with Comfort Inn?
I believe it's 1 year. 1 year, 100 families for 1 year.
And I believe they have an intention of keeping it full at all time,
Correct.
right?
That is our understanding. That's why Superintendent Ray said earlier, as one family may move out to get permanent housing, that the city of Portland would bring in another family into that spot, rotation.
And I think what makes that really difficult for us, and we've had some conversations with Jeff today at Young, is that the data that we have today shows the major increase at grade 1, which would theoretically require additional staffing. And we have to be able to balance that between both schools. But that doesn't mean in December that is the same. That doesn't mean that in December that the 19 kiddos are going to require the teacher in first grade. And that 7 of those families need, and then the next thing we know, there are 7 kiddos sitting in 4th grade. That's going to be the real hard part in this about adding additional teaching staff directly to a one classroom situation. We may be in a situation where it's best to think about supports and staying pretty nimble throughout the process in the year and saying, hey, it makes sense that right now here's the bump and here's where the support goes, and that in December that could shift. That's one option that's on the table. I guess we're gonna be adjusting a lot and making decisions throughout the process, and be as nimble as we possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of housing here, so the families are more than likely going to move somewhere else. And so it's probably going to be a revolving door. And so it's really hard to anticipate where to have the faculty and the resources when it could be sporadic with grades.
Correct. I mean, I think that's the piece here, is that in order to find some sort of permanent housing here, whether it be Saco, Biddeford, Old Orchard, Scarborough right now, that's pretty difficult. In one of the communities, it appeared that, I got an email the other day that, and they didn't let me know which community, but it appeared that 50 units were going to become available, or permanent housing situations. I don't necessarily see that happening for us here in, say, December, that 50, where's that coming from? And so I do think that we are in a situation where there will be a revolving situation throughout the year.
Any further questions on this item? Again, this will be an ongoing agenda item moving forward to be updated as we get more information. Okay, moving on to item H, which is the estimated end-of-year financials. You received a memorandum in your packet with the expense forecast for 2021 to 2022. Any questions on the expense forecast? Superintendent Ray, do you have anything you want to say on this item?
And again, this is an estimate situation because you still do have bills that will come in, and we've estimated $200,000 in remaining expenses. When you look at what would be left of $573,000 plus additional revenue, at the end of the year, we're hoping for a fund balance of $857,000. That includes our ability to pay back the $995,000 that the school department had in a deficit to the city. So we will be able to clear that piece up, still have a fund balance to apply to the next budget or to some of the other costs that come our way. And so we should be starting in a pretty good place as we start budget season next year.
Any questions? School Board Member Gale?
One quick just clarification and kind of some of the other previous conversations. The 300,000 reduced to go towards new school construction. As we move forward with that, that's going to get reimbursed
Correct.
in future years. So
Correct.
It just sets us up even better moving forward.
Right, we've got 300,000 that will be sitting, that will be part of the state project that will come back to us.
Moving on to item I, we have many policies this evening. First reading of policies, policy CBI, evaluation of superintendent, CB, school superintendent, CC, administrative organization, CHD, administration in the absence of policy, and then a policy to strike, policy CBC, superintendent hiring authority, and then policies to recode, BBBE, and expired term fulfillment vacancies, policy CBI E1, and policy CCA. Is there a motion to first reading of policies? School Board Member Truman?
I move we approve the first reading of policies CBI, CB, CC, CHD, BBE, BBBE, CBI-E, and CCC-E.
Second.
Motion's been made by School Board Member Truman, second by School Board Member Preble. Any discussion on the first reading of policies? Seeing no discussion on the first reading of policies, roll call vote. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Richard?
Yes.
School Board Member LaFortune?
Yes.
School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
And School Board Member Truman.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. That brings us to item 13, other information.
Mr. Mayor, I got to make one more motion.
School Board Member Truman.
I move we strike policies CBC and BBBE-R.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded by School Board Member Truman, School Board Member Preble. Any discussion on striking policy CBC and policy BBBER? Seeing no discussion, roll call vote. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Richard?
Yes.
School Board Member LaFortune?
Yes.
School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0. I believe now we're on to item 13, other information. There's nothing on the agenda. Anyone have anything? Okay, moving on to item 14. There's no executive session tonight. Brings us to item 15. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We'll go School Board Member LaFortune, then School Board Member Truman for the second. Any discussion? Roll call to adjourn. School Board Member Archie?
Yes.
School Board Member Preble?
Yes.
School Board Member Richard?
Yes.
School Board Member LaFortune?
Yes.
School Board Member Gale?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman.
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0 to adjourn at 7:32 PM. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.